Okay, happy evening, everyone. Our topic today is the property market heading for a doom in the new normal. Property transactions have come to an half during the MCO. Will it regain its glory? And what will be the new norm for the property markets? Will commercial property be more vulnerable than residential properties? Let's welcome our invited guest today, Dato Lim Chee Wee, the former president of Bar Council, and Dr. Alan Poon, Principal Consultant and CEO of Superior Wealth Resources, and our moderator as well as our panelist today, Dato Seri Raymond Liew, Entrepreneur Tax Accountant of McMillan Woods. And let me pass the mic to Dato Seri Raymond Liew.
Thank you, Casey. Okay, today we are talking about the property transactions. Somewhat has come to an abrupt halt during the MCO. Question here arose would be, will it regain its glory? What then will be the new norm for the property markets, post-MCOs as opposed to the pre-MCO? Will it be the same? Will commercial properties be more vulnerable than the residential properties? That is a question I guess many people would like to ask. And also, what then is the impact on the commercial and related contracts due to the MCO? This is where it's a legal questions where Dato Chee Wee will be addressing it. Whether the property market will withstand the onslaught of the economic slowdown is an area which we will discuss and debate on. And as you can see, right now, the existing severe cash flow syndromes of the business owners really and badly affect the market. Hence, investment from abroad is also not coming in, as this is the global pandemic issues. Now we are in the third extension, or I say the fourth. Someone tells me it's the fourth, I thought it's the third. I'm sure there'll be many legal suits on the frustration of legal contracts. And that is something where all of us need to look into. One way or another, if you are doing business, you're bound to engage in some contractual obligations. So what must both parties perform to avoid any legal actions taken? These are the areas which we are going to discuss. On that note, I notice it's only 9:01. We shall begin. Okay, gentlemen?
Yep.
Very quickly, I will give a brief of what I perceive the market to be, and subsequently the panelists led by Dr. Alan Poon and Dato Lim Chee Wee. All these are very learned people, very well experienced, and we will then deliberate on the topic at hand. Before I begin, the headline that you have seen on the flyer is stated that, is the property heading for a doom in the new normal? Now, I was guided by a friend of mine who is a star writer. He says to me that it should be phrased differently. It should be phrased in this way: is the property market doomed in the new normal? I guess that is very appropriate. Somehow, other people call me up and say, hey, is the property heading for doom in the new normal? It's very attractive. I like it when I saw it. But the proper English should be, is the property market doomed in the new normal? That I fully concur. Many a time I've been asked the following questions prior to us having this talk. What do you think of the property market now? Can buy or not? They ask me. What about the share market? Can buy or not? Then they say, alamak, when MCO is lifted, I may be engaging in many legal suits because of the contract that I signed pre-MCO. What do I need to do? Because of this pertinent question posed, we then decided to proceed to do a live talk to address these issues. The important question I asked, how is this pandemic, or in a broader term, crisis, different? Many of us term this pandemic as World War III, without physical warfare. But unlike a conventional warfare, where only the men are at war, while the women and children are spared, this coronavirus warfare does not discriminate, and it can attack anyone, old or young, men or women, even children. So please stay home and be a circuit breaker. That's what the Singapore government's tagline, circuit breaker. The COVID-19 outbreak certainly has placed tremendous pressure, not only on the Malaysian economy, but the global economy. The big question is, can the property market in Malaysia weather this unprecedented tornado? Post-MCO will be the new normal, and business definitely will not be the same as pre-MCO. We need to accept this reality. Like everything else, what is certain is the many uncertainties surrounding all of us. Ladies and gentlemen, I've always maintained that this pandemic brings about grave economic recessions. And if anything else, to me, this is the mother of all recessions. If you were to compare this pandemic back in 1997, the Asian financial crisis, this MCO is putting the whole economy to an immediate halt since 18th of March 2020. And our prime ministers announced only yesterday that the Malaysian economy loses 2.4 billion every day MCO is active. Now what? Is a question all of us ask. On this note, let us focus on the property market, where all transactions came to an abrupt halt when MCO kicks in. If you can still recall, as early as mid-2019, many property developers were already slowing down their projects, other than some bigger developers who continue with their development, probably due to financial contractual commitments. As of then, there was no ongoing works, and these developers were already looking for an exit strategies, probably to cut losses. Then the airlines, and the whole change of events cascading across all sectors. With the current economic situation, and for the first time, Malaysia has now experienced a complete shutdown of all businesses and social activities due to MCO, and so is the world at large. With the economic stimulus packages introduced by the Malaysian government to inject liquidity into the economy, which objective is primarily to keep the economy afloat. Even then, all of us are experiencing a tremendous drop in sales and probably zero cash flow. To me, and I'm sure to my fellow panelists, the property market is badly affected, but it will not crash. Yes, there are many uncertainties, but based on past experiences, property market will always rebound. Take it from me, it will. Investors are always more judicious and sensible in their investment in brick and mortar, and that's property. English terminology, by the way. If anything else, I believe more than gold investment. The only question right now is when the market will rebound. On this short note, we will be sharing the post-MCO of the property market with our very experienced gentleman, Dr. Alan Poon, who has written a number of books and conducted seminar talks on the opportunities in real estate in Malaysia. Likewise, the failing business communities, or rather the failing business communities, such as retailing, manufacturing, and service industries, with business contractual commitments, where the financial commitments will be enforced and legal disputes will take place in abundance, which will impact their business survivals. Hence, the urgent call for the enactment of the COVID-19 bills or acts. It is of paramount importance for a COVID-19 bills or act, similar to those of Singapore COVID-19 temporary measure, they call it temporary measure act, to be put in place to protect business owners from legal suits when they are unable to fulfill the contractual obligations to sustain their businesses post-MCO. As a matter of fact, there is already a group of associations attending to a press conference this coming Wednesday. Good luck, gentlemen. As to the fulfillment of these legal contractual obligations, we have our learned lawyer, Dato Lim Chee Wee, the former president of Bar Council, who will share his expert legal views shortly. I'm not going to take away the punchline of our learned panelists, but for all of us to share views and experiences. So ladies and gentlemen, on this note, let's proceed to discuss the topics of the day. Over to you, Dr. Ellen Poon. Dr. Ellen Poon, are you there?
Yes.
Over to you.
Hi. Hi. Good evening, everyone. First and foremost, thank you very much, Dato Seri Raymond from McMillan Woods for the invitation to be part of the panelists, and also KC as the host, as well as my learned friend, Dato Lim Chee Wee. Good evening to everyone who just joined in, and to our Muslim friends who just finished his Solat Tarawih. Selamat berbuka puasa. I am really looking forward to tonight's talk since we come up with the topic, and I think this is something that will attract everyone who is now work from home from MCO, because you know what, whenever there's a 4-letter word, in here we use the word doom lah. So it does attract a lot of media attention and whatnot, and especially for brick and mortar being investable product, I guess it does affect everyone from not just the financial market, but also all the way to the businesses, because at the end of the day, most businesses are housed in real estate anyway. So if you were to ask me how I look at it, I think the topic of whether the property market will crash in the new normal, I think there are two parts to this topic. First is that what defines the new normal? Because yesterday was normal, today was not new normal. So what about tomorrow? Is it a new normal? So I think to rightly put our perspective for tonight's topic, if I were to comment, it will be to maybe just to cover on the post-MCO period, perhaps ranging from 6 months to the next 12 to 18 months. And perhaps after that, once a vaccine or things are in place, a post-COVID period. I think that would be more suitable to look at brick and mortar or real estate. Having said that, having known that real estate is actually something that we invest for long term, whether for own stay or for investment purposes. That's what I believe in. And I think we all have to agree what Dato Sri have just mentioned earlier about the triple events. I think more than 3 events, from the economy to the health crisis that we are all facing now, that nobody has actually anticipated what has happened or will be to happen. In fact, prior to this FB Live, I was still searching my crystal ball to see what is going on tomorrow. But to put it in perspective, I think brick and mortar is something that is needed. And currently, I think we will be facing just similar to what everybody or research house, the financial analysis or the market researcher intelligence report that was released last week, and many other who is doing forecasts now, that definitely there will be a dip in the economy. Some are postulating a V shape, some are postulating a U shape, but ultimately I think all of us will feel the effect sooner than expected. But to the question of how serious is this MCO, how long will it continue, I think it's yet to tell the storyline, And I'm glad that you guys are doing the what you call this press conference soon to come out with the COVID-19 bill, something to what we are doing from our neighbors, because that is very important at the moment. Now I think all the stakeholders in the real estate fraternity, from our developers friend, from the upstream of the supply chain, all the way to the stakeholders, the architects, the contractors, the landlords, and the tenants. Perhaps those in the retail and the hospitality as well as aviation, they will feel the pinch first. And I think a lot of uncertainty, especially transactional things. Those who have just purchased property, what happens next? What about those who just got the key, and then do I still count the liability period from prior to 18 March MCO? So I think that will all that be addressed later on when my learned friend Dato Lim, who will be covering on the legal part. I guess there's a lot of things on the mind, but of course for the what they call this, the niche group of real estate fraternities, just like the investor group, people who are ready to buy, to come into the market. I think in any crisis, to coin the word by Dato Seri Raymond, the mother of all crises, I think the flip side of the coin is that this is also the mother of all opportunities. Okay, so I'm kind of opportunistic and also optimistic in the what do you call this, in the future, because there will always be a rebound. Of course, the question is that how heavy or how much we can actually entertain this holding period, so to say. So for investment friends, I think everyone is looking for a good buy. Hopefully, they will look into some fire sale, but of course, it will not be not so good on the economy lah. All right. So the supply chain of the whole real estate is very complex. So I couldn't generalize this, or I couldn't do an outlook on this. I think today is more of putting the dots of what has happened and trying to see where are the opportunities, or what are the positioning that we can come in from lah. Because property, it involves from the industrial side to the commercial side. Commercial also, you have the hotels, the retail, non-food, the malls, the offices, shop lots, all the way to residential. Residential, you have the strata, the landed, as well as, of course, all these, coming into the primary market, secondary market, or even auction market. So for those who just join in, I think real estate cannot be just made into a very general, or so-called lump it into a one general sentence. Because whenever I see media reporting news, or even when I talk to friends, they say, oh, the market is going to crash, market is going to be bad. Yes and no, because we have to see which area we are going into. And are we on the buyer, or are we on the seller, or are we on the renter's perspective? Because I myself, I stay in the place that I own. At the same time, I'm also actually renting an office. So a landlord can be a renter at the same time. So we have to know where we come from, and what is our financial objective at the end of the day. I think this is something very important for people to establish, rather than just comment it from from a general perspective that the market is going to crash and whatnot. Because to those who want to go in, I think they are looking for a value buy. They are looking for some what do you call this, correction of prices. And I do agree with Dato Seri Raymond just now when you say that the market, I think it wouldn't crash in a sense that what we experienced in the 97, 98 Asian financial crisis, because today is not just the financial challenge. It is more like there will be some correction in the market due to perhaps the demand and supply. And that, of course, can postulate all the way back to the reason why there will be a lot, perhaps some job losses that some research houses are actually forecasting. So all said and done, I think brick and mortar will be here to stay. Will be here to stay. All right. Of course, going forward, I think there will be some questions asked. Perhaps maybe we will go into deeply on some of the things that some of us are concerned from the business community or the investment community.
All right. On that note, Dato Chee Wee, over to you on the legal part of it.
Okay, thank you very much, Dato Raymond, for hosting this. And first of all, to all the first responders, healthcare workers, thank you for keeping us all safe. I hope everyone pray that everyone stays safe and this will all blow over. What I'd like to discuss is firstly, what is the law? What may be the law? And what should be the law? Okay, let's start with what is the law. So what we have is this. We have COVID-19, which is a pandemic, emergency crisis. What is its impact? Its impact has then led to the Malaysian government to impose movement control order, MCO, since 18th of March. What impact does that have? Okay, we have essential services that remain open, like banking, but people are unable to move around. For example, you may be said that you can't go to a bank to issue a check to make payment of your balance of purchase price for your property. It may be said that you're unable to move around to continue with construction of your project. So the COVID-19 knock-on effect, MCO knock-on effect to performance of contractual obligations, be it obligation to pay, be it obligation to bill, obligation to deliver. Okay, how does the law deal with it? And there are two parts to the law. We have, if your contract does not have what we call a force majeure clause, then the Contracts Act Section 57 comes into play, what we call the doctrine of frustration, where if you can argue that having entered into a contract, there's been a change of circumstances to the extent that it is impossible to perform or illegal to perform, then the contract is void and the parties are restored to their pre-execution contract position. Now, in order to prove or to establish frustration is very difficult. You have to show impossibility to perform. The mere fact that it may be more difficult, it may be impractical, it may be more expensive to perform, that does not constitute doctrine, or that does not constitute impossibility of performance. We have had a similar case in Hong Kong during the SARS outbreak. A tenant tried to use the SARS outbreak as an excuse to establish frustration. The Hong Kong court said no, it does not, because all it means is there's been a temporary issue that you are unable to occupy it, but you can still occupy it later down the road. So the threshold test to meet in the doctrine of frustration is very high. Okay, so we have that as a legal principle. What if you then have a force majeure clause in your contract, and then it's very fact dependent. What does your force majeure clause says? Does it have the words pandemic, outbreak, quarantine, restriction? If it does, then it applies. But even if it applies, what is the consequence? In terms of, are you obliged to give notice? Are you not obliged to give notice? Or does it lead to termination of contract or suspension of contract or postponement of performance of contract? So it's very much contract dependent. So number one, if your contract doesn't provide for it, then it's doctrine of frustration, very high test. Number two, if it provides for force majeure, it depends on the contract terms. So this is what the law is. But what may be the law because of the COVID-19? Now, there are any number of people all consulting their lawyers, looking at their contractual obligations. There have been any number of contracts already where people have exercised their force majeure clause, thinking they can get out of the contract or postpone the contract. So our courts will be flooded with litigation. Now, you would have read in the papers, our judges are now moving online hearing. Okay, there are debate among lawyers. Oh, is that valid, invalid? Live streaming of cases, is that valid or invalid? Because Malaysian lawyers are all very creative. They'll take every conceivable argument out there in the world to fight for something for the cause of their clients. So the law, as it may be, is very uncertain. So then it begs the next question: what should the law be? And in here is simply this: we need, number one, commercial certainty. Number two, we need to have disputes decided effectively and expeditiously and cost effectively. And to do so, we need COVID-19 legislation. We need the equivalent of the English Coronavirus Act 2020, the equivalent of the Singapore Temporary Measures Relief Act of 2020 as well. What should the Act say? The Act should provide for, number one, legal rights. What legal rights? Number one, part of that would be limitation period, because people who want to file their legal suits within the limitation period may be unable to do so. They can't get access to a lawyer, they can't get their documents, they can't get the people together to assemble the case. So you must postpone limitation period during this time, number one. Number two, there are other issues such as registration of births, deaths, etc. Provide for that as well. Then the second part is contractual obligations, performance, termination. Again, you provide for that. If Bank Negara can say, look, all the banks must, licensed financial institutions must postpone monthly obligations by 6 months, that is tantamount to a variation of a contract. And the question is, can Bank Negara actually do that? Of course, the banks will follow Bank Negara because that is a directive from a regulator. But as a matter of law, it begs the question, how far can that be implemented? But of course, banks are doing it. So there should be an amendment there. So contractual performance. Number two, what about, apart from limitation, contractual performance, what about financially distressed companies, individuals? Our companies, Commission of Malaysia, have increased the threshold for bankruptcy and winding up, B, the time period for insolvency. Then the other question is, what about meetings, company meetings? tribunal meetings, strata management meetings. There has been provision for that as well. So we need a COVID-19 Act to make provision for all this. Singapore has provided for an act for, number one, financial distress companies and individuals, number two, contractual performance, number three, courts, number four, real property tax, and something else as well. So we need such a piece of legislation. Our problem is Parliament sits on 18th of May. What are the list of bills to be tabled? Nothing for the moment. All the Parliament's going to do on 18th of May is the Agong speech, and that's it. No, nothing is being put onto the agenda for the moment. We know that the Works Minister has said there's a necessity for force majeure legislation. But we also know that when one looks at the Parliament website, nothing is there. So I applaud the efforts led by the various groups who are pushing for COVID-19 Act. We need that. We need a piece of legislation because otherwise the courts are flooded with unnecessary cases which can be solved by a piece of simple legislation. Thank you.
Dato Chee Wee, you just hit the nail on the head. I'm glad to hear from you that it is imperative, if not of paramount importance, for a COVID-19 Bills or Act 2020 to be put in place, similar to that of the Singapore COVID-19 Temporary Measure Act. This is definitely to protect business owners from legal suits when they are unable to fulfill their contractual obligations to sustain their businesses post-MCO. Earlier, you were talking about one, the bank is issuing a directive, and two, the other one is the law. If that being the case, which would prevail when there's a variation of contracts? Dato Chee Wee?
Well, in this case, the issue doesn't arise because all the licensed banks or financial institutions are implementing the Bank Negara directive. So essentially what was happening is that in all the agreements, the lender is giving an indulgence to the borrower. So by conduct, the contract has been varied.
I see.
And okay, can I just add this here? So what you have is an inequality in the industry, in the banking of financing industry to this extent. Licensed financial institutions make up a large portion of the financing industry for housing loans and cars. But there's one area of car loans where the financier are not licensed financial institutions. For example, Mercedes and BMW, they're not licensed. So you would have read in the social media that there's a bit of hoo-ha. And in fact, at another level, it's a bit of a class issue that people who have BMWs or Mercedes financed by them are not enjoying this 6 months moratorium. So that is why you need an omnibus legislation so that there is equality of treatment of everybody.
Right. So I do hope on the 18th of May, with the Parliament sitting, that they will at least hear out the proposal for the enactment of the COVID-19 bills.
I certainly hope so.
Yeah, I should be involving you in that press conference. I'll speak to the people as I'm also involved. Okay, Alan, I'm sure you can't wait. You mentioned earlier that property owners, especially speculators, may be looking to sell the properties after the 6-month bank moratoriums ends. Whether that itself is an opportunity for many property investors to sell for whatever the reason. If I may just share my view first, since you brought this up, and I'm also putting that question to you. Speaking as a small property investor myself, I would say shrewd, if not astute investors who understand the property investment gameplay will definitely be hunting for good buy. Unquestionably, I would have thought to sell when the property market is bottoming out is not the gameplay nor the stratagem of any property investors. I put it to you that come October 2020, astute investors will be hunting for good deals, as I foresee many bankruptcies of companies and even individuals with job losses, and those who are making negative returns, or at worst, those who are in the stock market on margin calls. What is your view, Alan? Dr. Alan?
Yeah. I guess the time frame is something that we all cannot foresee, but looking at how things are going right now in Malaysia itself, before we talk about overseas, is that I think currently there is a breathing space for everybody, thanks to the moratorium for the housing loan, lah. But the banks are also pretty smart in the sense that, now it's raining, then that is where they collect back the umbrellas, you see. So despite the government, the Bank Negara has so-called reduced the SRR rate to provide more liquidity in the market, as well as also, the loan moratorium, which also allows more people to use up some of their cash, the next 6 months. I still foresee that eventually there will be kind of like a credit crunch in the market. Of course, there are some big companies who will say that no, they are not going to retrench people or having any job cuts. But eventually, I think it's all about the whole economic cycle. Once this MCO is lifted, before even October, I will foresee that a lot of companies are, number one, of course, they are struggling for collections. They are struggling for collection because currently, if you do go and ask your office boy to collect, go for all these things, and you are not part of the essential services, then you're actually violating the government's order. So supposedly collections are the first thing on the mind of business people, and I myself are involved in a few businesses. I foresee that's number one key, the key criteria that the most people will go forward. And secondly, of course, to generate more sales revenue. Now, having said that, I think a lot of cost-cutting measures will come into place first. Now, why I'm talking about this before I lead us to the property speculators or the investors part is that ultimately we need to see where is the supply of these properties. All right. Now, developers, number one, they will be not launching new products definitely. To even break even this year, don't talk about profit, I think is a good game plan for most of our so-called developers friends, because at the end of the day, it's all about making sure that all the sales are built up to date, and having said that, of course, the unfit developers, those who have yet to get any end financing or perhaps are not in good shape with a lot of bad debts, these are the things that I think investors need to be careful of, because sometimes it's not just about buying a product. If in case you're buying into a primary product, no matter how astute an investor is, the fear is that the risk is that you get into an abandoned project. And I'm not putting here to make it all look gloom and doom, but there are cases where developer goes into bankruptcy, and you see a big giant white elephant in the middle of the highway, in the middle of the land, and that is not healthy for the real estate market. So no one want to get into that conundrum. So I think from the prime market, investors who wants to go in for a good buy should have the negotiation power moving forward, 6 months onwards, or even up to say next year, second quarter, because that is where we can see, we call it, after the tsunami, who is swimming naked, we will all know, who is desperate for sales, if you talk about the primary market. Then we go back to the secondary market. The secondary market, the sub-sales, which all the properties are there. So I still believe that people who are staying in what they call this existing property, no one want to lose the roof above their head, despite business setback or whatever, because that's the last thing you want. Unless you are single, you have no commitment on anything at all. But if you have a family to feed, and I guess that's the last thing on your mind, sorting out your businesses and even all the employees at hand with all the uncertain regulations in place and whatnot. So I think that's the last so-called asset that you want to forego, and hopefully the banks can look into this also. But of course, banks, even now with the 6-month moratorium, a lot of investors group are saying, everyone is not having revenue, loans are deferred, but how come the banks are still earning interest? You see, so they are the one who is currently making money and not affected a lot by the pandemic or by the MCO or COVID. So having said that, in the sub-sale market, I think there's a lot of room as per all the years, 10 years, 20 years, NAPIC means the National Property Information Center statistics. Secondary sub-sale market always has the highest transaction than primary market. And that is because a lot of people will go for so-called below market deal to go into. So I think that is also something good for those investors who want to go in to buy, because especially area that they have targeted much earlier. All right. And of course, then we talk about the next subsector. What about perhaps some of these hotels that are in the news last few days? Some of the hotels are already out of operation. So some investors, they can go in because they are zooming into the residential. They just want to buy up a few good units. But what about the big so-called big boys out there in the market? So I did share in the past few webinars or interviews that I've done in the last 1-2 weeks is that, some of this perhaps is an opportunity, warehouses could be turned into perhaps a new format, an integrated business for some of the people who are, see the opportunity. And I've been serving some clients, foreign clients, as an internal business advisor prior to the MCO, that they are looking for some of these for their businesses, those who deal with supply chain business and whatnot. Then, of course, as I said, hotel, perhaps now it's time to look into hotel space. Could it be something like a smaller space for warehouse, instead of a larger space? Can it be converted into, of course, then we talk about the title, but if it's a commercial usage, can we turn it into something like more, it's all about utilizing the usage space moving forward. So I think moving forward, not just about the new product that's coming out, a lot of businesses need to basically remodel. And I think the remodel starts from this, between the 2 years, the 7 inches, because I think a lot of concepts can be done. And that is where we will see a different trend in the market. And I think today it is high time also we bring back this concept of equity crowdfunding, or crowdfunding of amongst investors or even players in the market, because I think it is time to get everybody together to look into helping each other. Besides investing or buying, I think the SME community who is in distress or in having issues have to also understand that real estate is not a burden. If I have always tell that in some of my courses, seminars, that real estate is part of your business. If you would, during your good times when you're making money, you should park some of your portfolio into asset. We all know about the stories of McDonald's, how McDonald's actually are not in the food business. Some of them say they're in the toy business, but actually they are in the real estate business. Because ultimately, if you are into business and you have some property that you hedge to some real estate, today, isn't it a good time when you are actually going back to your bankers and say, can I actually refinance some of my properties or doing some top-up loans? Provided, of course, you have an asset, you are an existing client with the banks, But if you are not and you're just pushing for the business, and this is where I fear the most. So in crisis, in times like this is where I think real estate will really, really help. Instead of talking about bankruptcy, foreclosure, and people selling their house just to But of course, there are those so-called micro enterprises, people who have less than 10 or 15 employees. I think those are the ones that will be badly affected in this coming so-called in the current economic crisis. Even MCO is lifted, the next 3 to 6 months is going to be a severe challenge for most of the SME . And having said that, the office sector, I would say that it's also a good time for some of the businesses to consider downgrading or decentralizing some of their HQ or offices. As much as social distancing is need to be in place, just like today I received a news from Vietnam. Vietnam, after 3 weeks of lockdown, they actually released their so-called lockdown, and they restart the economy. But of course, they also go into certain certain economies to kickstart the economy, as well as also very strict hygiene and social distancing. So if Malaysia could follow suit, I think at least it will give a breather to the economy in terms of the commercial from the office angle. And I think co-working space, it's a good game plan for those of you who are in the SME or office sector, because at the end of the day, the hot desk, of course, you're not talking about hot desk, because hot desk, you get everybody together, and I think that's not what the whole market is looking at. So but I think all the so-called small rooms, 1 or 2 people, or even those with less than 10 or 15 employees, they can consider somewhat, looking into co-working as one of the so-called concept to so-called do cost-cutting measure. Likewise, some of these hotels can be turned into co-living as well, because we also don't want to, to have a group of people. We already have too many people, homeless. Okay, that's why we have Kachara kitchen and all these things. But if we can actually get some of these people to actually rent some of these places that are perhaps, because when everybody said, one man's loss is another man's treasure. So there's always 2 sides to a coin in real estate. And I always believe that speculators or not, ultimately the real demand is that, when you transact, I think there will be some price drop in the market across all sectors. Not so much in the industrial side, perhaps, because as we see more and more people are going into e-commerce, more and more are doing online delivery. I think moving forward, e-commerce is going to be a big thing, especially with the adoption of 5G. So if that is all that's coming in, I think the last mile delivery is something very important. People should look into remodeling some of the businesses where they utilize some of this space rather than to having more retail outlets like those in the malls. Even the malls today, those who are suffering, I think they should look into doing a last mile delivery, even if they're in fashion. Perhaps they can order online, and the dress or the coat can be tailor-made and sent to you. It's something like a bespoke or boutique. So a lot of all these things that is happening, that house they needed a real estate in the market for the business, need to remodel and look into that. Have I answered your question? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Certainly, the infamous slogan of the bank is that when it is sunshine, the bank will extend you the umbrellas. But when it rains, the bank will say, "I want my umbrella back." That is a typical infamous slogan of the bank. But from what you have just said, do you think the commercial property will be more vulnerable than the residential properties, Alan?
Well, again, I guess if you're talking about existing stock, there are already some oversupply of properties in the market, especially in the residential, where it is a hot topic. And thanks to the government initiative last year, the home ownership campaign, with some goodies like 10% discount, stamp duty up to $1 million is a waive and whatnot. Despite all that and absorption rate, we still have so-called unsold units in the market.
Can I just stop you there for a moment about this home ownership campaign?
All right.
Which included 10% discount of the property price and also the stamp duty exemption. But to me, I've spoken to a number of developers. This initiative was initiated back in 2019. That is basically to encourage home ownership among Malaysians to address the overhang property. I've been speaking to these developers. They're saying they're already offering that 10% discount anyway. So the so-called the gimmicks of giving this 10% from this home ownership campaign is just a joke. And the problem is many Malaysians seem to equate this initiative, as cheap sales from the developers, which seriously was not the case. Alan, am I not right? Because property developers were already offering 10% anyway.
I do concur with what you have just said, because the sentiment in the market has always been, because whenever we do talks or when we meet with investors, when this HOC was initially launched, we immediately quickly reflect back at the first HOC. In fact, this is not the first HOC. The first HOC was sometime 20 years ago, and when we equate back, ultimately the HOC seems to favor the developers, the builders, to so-called let them finish off their unsold stocks. And I do agree with you, 10% is not a lot, but of course that is a different ball game altogether, because that is basically to get homeowners, the first-time home buyers. Now, if you're talking about astute investor or people who have more than 1 or 2 properties ready, definitely this is not the area that it is for them. But I just want to feel that at this current juncture, if let's say someone is in the process who has the money to buy, and who feel that renting a house now today, they don't want to be at the mercy of a landlord or whatnot. If moving forward, the government can look into bringing back the HOC or continue the HOC with a certain time frame, I think that's something good for home ownership lah. But for investor, we are looking at a different breed. We are looking at a different breed. So coming back to your question, whether commercial properties are more vulnerable than residential, 2 perspectives. Number one, if you're looking at the owner or the landlord, I think everyone has to be ready for a long haul, as businesses are facing the economic challenge. I believe some of them may want to downsize, or they may want to revamp their business to online and whatnot. So I think there will be some credit crunch as well to landlords. So that's why if there is any call, because I also got a lot of PMs and messages, asking me, Alan, if I have this tenant asking me for discount for commercial, should I allow it? I said, number one, in the recent economic stimulus, the government already said if you actually provide more than 30%, there's a tax incentive. That's number one. Number two, even if you give below 30% or whatnot, you are actually able to sustain that tenant rather than to let them vacate the premises, and then you will have an issue where you have to find the next tenant. Supposedly you can even fill up the next tenant. you have a loss of number one. You need to pay the 1 month or 1.5 months commission to the agent. You have to give a renovation free grace free period. So ultimately, it's good to keep current tenants despite everyone is facing challenging times. All right. So commercial tenants will definitely see a stress test, I would say, in terms of being affected by the crisis. Residential will, as usual, for certain areas that are oversupplied, there will be a lot of competition, especially those who just gotten their keys. Okay, say for instance, those who are before MCO, that you have just gotten the keys. This is the very challenging time where you need to look for a tenant. And I will say that if you can get any tenant that is genuine, all right, provided you have done a proper screening and filter, you should actually take it up rather than to being fussy about it, because now it's all about survival. Remember earlier when I talked about the U-shaped economy? So ultimately, the U-shape is where everybody try to survive. Just get past these few months first. Then we talk about at least beefing things up with all the contracts, even all the forced merger now. I think all the tenancy agreement, everybody will be very scrutinizing this clause already, or the what they call it, the doctrine of frustration, as Dato Lim was mentioning. So yeah, so it's very subjective in terms of the sector. Commercial sector, there are plenty.
Yeah, certainly. Dr. Chee Wee, I'm just thinking, because on Wednesday they're going to have a press conference on this COVID-19 bills, or rather the proposal. What do you think are the emphasis that the organization should put forward to the government to ensure, and also to tell them how important it is to have this COVID-19 Bills Act 2020 put in place quickly? Perhaps from a legal perspective, you could advise us?
I think the arguments you should put forward, Dato Raymond, is simply commercial certainty. That's the most important, because at the moment, given the variety and diversity of contracts out there, which will go to court, the courts will be flooded. There'll be no consistent judgment at the first instance. And to be fair to the judges, it's only because if there's a force majeure clause, the clause will be interpreted differently depending on the wording. And so a lot of time and resources will be wasted on unnecessary litigation. Whilst I derive my livelihood from litigation, I'll be the first to say, if people can avoid litigation, avoid it. It's actually unnecessary time and resources spent. So what we need then is for the government to step in. The government must step in and put aside the political differences. I suspect the reason why there is no legislation being put forward on the first day of our parliamentary sitting on 18th of May, and it hasn't set for months, is because the fear that any bill put forward by the government may be defeated in the House, and therefore it may be construed as a vote of no confidence. I'm confident that on this occasion, if you have a legislation such as a COVID-19 legislation, which is for the good of the entire country, there'll be a bipartisan support for this legislation. So actually the government needs to take this first step. AGC is probably ready with such a piece of legislation. I'm very sure they have drafted it ready. It is actually political will. So we need to, my advice to the lobby group is to reach out to 222 members of parliament and say to each of them, please, in the name of our country and economy, support such an initiative.
Well, Singapore has already done it, so we are way behind. They are already at the final stage.
But Singapore has a very strong, one may say, authoritarian, if not dictatorial government. So one has to put that aside. We unfortunately, we are where we are in our country. Our MPs must move forward. Prime Minister must lead and help us.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, Alan, I'm just thinking with the in view of the uncertainty of the MCOs and also the gloomy economic outlook, and bearing in mind that consumer is now more cautious in spending, I foresee not only the existing overhang of properties, but there will be more that is on the pipeline. What can the government do to boost up the property market? From your perspective, before you give a perspective, I know you have a lot to say. Let me just share with you mine. I'm of the view that the government should at least quickly set up a study group to study, discuss, and formulate workable strategies with the respective industry stakeholders, as you were talking to me this morning, to understand the aftermath. After post-MCO will be the aftermath, affecting the supply chain, starting from construction up to the completion. We also discussed very briefly that perhaps government ought to relook at some of the following measures, one of which is RPGT. As a tax practitioners and the tax advisors, I'm of the view that this RPGT at the rate we are going is hammering the property market, as investors generally are not willing to sacrifice their kind of hard-earned gain to a somewhat rather high rate of tax. Alternatively, like before, the government should consider to reduce the rate of tax or do away with the RPGT after 5 years of ownership. And that was once we enjoyed that, to prevent speculation. The whole idea of 5 years is to prevent speculations, which can artificially, of course, inflate prices in the longer term. Of course, the threshold for foreign buyers, as you are aware, Budget 2020 allowed foreigners to buy properties from 1 million to 600,000 in year 2020 onwards. This may not be good enough to clear the overhang, especially in the high-end property sectors. I would have thought, Alan, the ideal solution is perhaps to clear the overhang is to remove this threshold and also extend the purchase to both offices and commercial buildings. Of course, when I discussed with you, we also talk about lowering the statutory reserve requirement, the SRR, which Bank Negara currently have lowered the 100 basis point from 3% to 2% in an effort to show up liquidity, so to speak, in the economy. And this actually is a good sign under the current pandemic. And this move can be done to include, of course, I'd like to see, like you say, also to lower exempting stamp duties on instruments, levies, and charges. So what other areas have you in mind that the government can assist under the current situation, Alan?
Okay, I think, of course, first of all, is that hopefully by 18 May, we don't have another shock of something that we didn't expect. If the same government is here to stay, I think, first of all, political stability is instrumental to property investors or the real estate market, because ultimately the economic driver depends on a stable political climate. Now, having said that, eventually, I think property, we need more of understanding in terms of why we want to go in and buy a property. I actually hate the word speculation, because I don't believe in so-called making fast money just because you want to flip it, after 2 years or 5 years. Whatever we all said and done from all the charts and analysis, all the past figures of performance, it's just an indicator. Will things be repeating the same in the next 2 years to 5 years to 10 years down the road? I can tell nobody knows, all right? But having said that, I'm a believer of buying a property and hold it for long term, because the cost of transaction of selling a property for me, it doesn't make sense, so I'm a hoarder. I believe in tangible assets. I have to qualify myself on that first. So then when the next question is this: if everybody is buying, who is selling? Of course, in good times or bad times, there are people who will have to sell the property, either because they either want to migrate, or they go into divorce, or any situation that we cannot foretell. Now, perhaps the government can look into, post-COVID or post-MCO, is to look into relaxing, or perhaps to go with the RPGT. All right, make it a 0 for certain category of people, for certain age, because I believe there are people who keep the property. Like for myself, as I said, I keep the property, but there will be a time when I need to sell some of these, because it's for my retirement nest and whatnot. So it all depends on the the age group of the people. Now, if RPGD is relaxed, then of course the next question is this: where does other revenues, so-called, to cover the loss of RPGT from the government's coffers? I think by lowering RPGT, it also allows people to go and buy and sell, right? So if we increase the transaction of buying and selling, ultimately we also helping the market to revive to move ahead rather than if you keep it so high, people don't want to sell, then you have a very tight loan approval or whatnot. So looking at, of course, historical figure again, the SRR, of course, it's at has been lowered, but we foresee if this thing is still uncertain with a lot of impact coming ahead, I would foresee that the next quarter or maybe end of this year, there will be another reduction of SRR, which relates to a very cheap financing or OPR by the banks. So if we can have that very cheap financing in the market, coupled with encouragement from the government to so-called remove the RPGD, where people can buy and sell freely, cap it within the next 12 to 18 months or so, I think that will spur the domestic circulation of liquidity, at least among the brick and mortar industry. And of course, all the instruments should continue to relax all the instrument, instead of previous 100,000, 1% and whatnot. Now at least keep it that way. And perhaps also to bring in foreign direct investment, because whenever I read news that the foreigners are taking their money out from the market and whatnot, I feel a bit sad, because being a Malaysian, I feel that the country has so much potential. So if there is this ever a chance to bring back the concept of Visit Malaysia here, it has to be using true real estate, where we ask the foreigner, those who have funds, to come in, because I think with political stability, Malaysia is a good country with nice food and whatnot. I think there's so much potential for our property. Oh yeah, one more category of property that I foresee that will still continue to do good, and perhaps it's also a good investment, is the homestay category. So we do not want to take tourism or hotel as one group. Homestay ultimately locates in a tourist attraction area, places like Serenda, or what do you call this? All these nice Janda Bae, or even let's say in the east is the outskirts of Kota Kinabalu, not the city. So I think
Alan, hold your horses.
Yeah.
I foresee the next 2 years nobody's going to travel. Okay, everyone will be going on social distancing.
Yeah,
okay?
you cut me too early, because I'm talking about domestic.
Domestic. Okay.
Because homestay is usually more appreciated by. I mean, if we can't fly out, also we at least have a family travel year-end plan with in some of the homestay. And homestay, it's not so crowded like hotels. You either take a villa or you take a so-called a budget place. Also, you will still. It's the social distancing can still be adhered for homestay.
You talk about Visit Malaysia here, Visit Malaysia here is for tourists, right? And also about foreign direct investment, you can kiss that goodbye as well. Nothing is going to happen for the next couple of years because of the global pandemic. So maybe we look at everyone is now talking about working from home, WFH. Okay, I mean, from my observation, working from home option is already kicking off in many of the office work, where employers are now shifting the work culture from physical offices to working from home, which can be, to me, it's more efficient actually, and it's also very cost effective, and it's cost saving.
Yep.
Especially now in MCO. This conventional business culture are now heading towards the digital e-platform, like the CRM, which is what WeMeet is doing. You must not forget also that the property prices in Klang Valley is now rather high. So I foresee more and more of this younger generation, the millennials, are finding it difficult to buy a property or even afford to rent one themselves. So I see these millennials buying property outside the Klang Valley already as a better option, since the work from home culture is going to be more and more popular. One would appreciate that work from home is now the new norm, so to speak, and more so post MCO. What do you think?
Yeah, I think there's a high possibility work from home can be a culture, but again, it all depends on the willingness of the corporations or the SME to adopt that culture across company-wide in their organization. Because at the end of the day, I think is how to maintain or manage some of this work from home productivity, because they can't be seen in the office. So is there a way to track some of your employees? Is it based on what do you call this? What KPI we are looking at? So if the business owner can remodel some of their processes or workflow, in the sense that they can look into work from home perhaps 3 times or 4 times a week, and the rest you just have to come for meetings or even a Zoom meeting or whatnot, like what we're having now through Google Hangout or Google Meet. I think it is possible, and that is the reason more that more of these offices could be decentralized, rather than to occupy, example, a grade A offices, having a corporate identity. Perhaps more and more people can go across and to perhaps instead of being locked down, so to say, in an office space, they can even go and travel and make this part of the company rich, especially I see that happening in the what do you call this, those that require last mile delivery. All right.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
In view of the time constraint, I want to quickly address this one particular issues. When earlier I asked you, will commercial property be more affected than residential? During MCO, somebody mic is on, is it? During MCO, as you can see, more of these retail outlets, they are moving into some kind of so-called online delivery. So I foresee the commercial building will be affected, and shopping mall will all be, losing its value and perhaps its enticement. I see the e-commerce is the new norm, and especially food and beverages. You see, during now MCOs, already many of the F&Bs are changing their business model, and this gives rise to more businesses for delivery services like Panda and Grab.
Yep.
Now, with this change in the business model and mindset, shopping mall certainly will be affected, as the growing trend is now towards online shopping. And more so when MCO is lifted, where social distancing will be put in place. So post-MCO will never be the same as pre-MCO, and it will take some time before it revert to normalities. I just shared with you, a friend of ours, Dato Marcus Lee, was sharing with me that as an astute property investor himself, indicating that using China as the leading example, there will be a big fall in offline retailers, that is all the shopping malls, having shops in shopping mall in favor of online players. I also share the same view that this switch of consumer behavior is evident right now in China, and it's already happening in Malaysia during MCO, where many of us are already using online to purchase our requirements. Now, this is not a sudden change. You may say it's a sudden change in consumer demand of shopping mentality. And this lead to many of the shopping malls ultimately will be impacted. But the good thing is that with online, there will lead to a greater demand for warehousing facilities and logistics. Ultimately, in terms of property, a demand for warehouse properties. How do you see this? And don't forget the advance and rapid changes of IT, internet technology, is already the next business communication tool. The traditional business model will soon be a thing of the past. So as Jack Ma was saying in one of his recent interview, internet technology is here to stay, and it's the next wave. How do you see that? You have 3 minutes.
Yes, I totally concur. Yes, I totally concur with you, Dato Seri. You are spot on to say that we are definitely moving to see that a lot of offline retailers will get a hit, as I mentioned earlier as well. And I don't find it surprising that eventually some of these shopping malls could be turned into trade cities. Because currently some of these, because it's all about space usage and layout planning. A lot of these could be just fulfillment centers, as more and more warehousing space are actually scarce. Even in Malaysia, the industrial space are not quite enough. And if the e-commerce economy is booming with last mile delivery all intact, you see Malaysia already have more than 40 over last mile delivery providers. All right, and if that can be more make enhanced or make effective, I think eventually some of these malls have to be remodeled or turned into a so-called fulfillment hub or space centers, where it is just merely they have a small retail site, but the rest of it is more to storing of their items And having said that, there are more and more shopping malls unplanned. So-called planned supply are still coming up, around 1 million over square meters coming up in the next few years. But then again, we can go to the extreme, but we also can say, post COVID-19, when once the vaccine are there, everyone will resume normalcy, and we still see. I still long to go out to the mall to watch movie, have my Starbucks and get a good meal with family lah. But ultimately, it will be good to see some change. And for those of them who are so-called in the retail line, I think it's time to change. Otherwise, will be changed lah. So
absolutely,
yes,
absolutely. Okay, gentlemen, that also applies to you, to me, and also to Dato Chee Wee as legal practitioners. We were talking about work from home earlier. What do you think of the appeal of Soho? Soho is a small home office, and this I've seen already in place during MCO. As a matter of fact, this practice is very much in practice in developed countries, which offer enhanced flexibility. And I see that such practice is also dependent of course, like you said, demographics, but I see this as an increasing trend. So perhaps in the near future, Dato Chee Wee, you can run a legal office at home with a Soho, and you can communicate with your staff and your partners, from your own home, comfort of your home.
Yeah, absolutely correct, Dato Raymond. In the sense that because we've now learned that we are almost, if not equally, if not more productive than in the office. This now suggests we need far less office space. So that's one. Two, and with this pandemic issue, possibility, even with the vaccine, it mutate and down the line, I don't know what else may happen. People will learn to have business continuity plans where half work from home, half in the office. So I personally see a shrink in office demand, office space demand, as people learn to WFH and, as you say, Soho.
Right.
Yeah, there's quite a number of questions coming in.
Okay.
So
Hang on. Okay. Oh, your question coming. Okay. You'll fire
yeah,
away.
okay. So this question is for Dato Chee Wee. Okay, is any COVID registrations going to conflict with various arbitration clauses signed for cross-border transaction signed before the COVID-19? I repeat, is any COVID registrations going to conflict with various arbitrations clauses signed for cross-border transactions signed before COVID-19? This is from Matthew Yo. Dato Seri?
I thought you are speaking to Dato Chee Wee, right?
Yeah, Dato Chee Wee.
Dato Chee Wee? Dato Chee Wee?
Yeah.
Did you hear the questions?
No, I couldn't hear it. So sorry.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. This is any COVID registration. Can you hear me?
I can't hear Casey. I'm so sorry. I don't know why.
You
Ian,
can't hear
can
me?
you come in, Ian?
No, you can hear me or not? Dr. Sherman, you can hear me?
I can hear you.
I can't. I don't know why I can't hear Casey though.
You can't
That's
hear.
very
So
odd.
maybe okay, maybe we go to next question first. Later I type it down. Okay. So this question for Dato Seri Raymond.
Okay.
Okay. The stimulus package amount to about 20% of our GDP. How do you think the government is going to cover for this deficit? Oil price, commodity price are low. Export is not good for foreseeable future. Are they going to introduce further fiscal measures?
This for me,
Yes, this for
as
you.
a practicing accountant, I can share this with you. I don't really know where the money is going to come from. Certainly, the tax collection of the target is out of the target. Petronas is now supposedly the main source of tax revenue to the government, with property price, or rather with the with oil price now being at 11 or lower. I really do not know where they're going to get the money. I actually did pose this question, where the money is going to come from. The only way is, of course, borrowing. Just like America is in debt. Much of their debts owes to China. The only way is for the government to go on borrowing, go on negative budgets, to create liquidity in the economy, to pump in more money. But to print money, that would be wrong. I believe in America, they're printing more money, because by printing more money, you are only devaluing your own money. And in the long term, you suffer greater consequences. The reality is nobody knows where the money is going to come from. But I foresee that once the economy picks up, tax revenue would like to increase their tax collections. Of course, there will be other tax introduced. The service tax currently, at 6% might be increased further. That hopefully, when the economy picks up, I don't see that as a problem. If economy picks up with a bit of higher rate tax, that's quite okay. Important thing is the government need to help with the economic recovery. And that is like, for example, the property markets. If they can do away with the RPGT, or even just for a year, for the property to recover, that would help. Okay?
Okay. So another question is, will property developer reduce their highly priced property after post MCO?
Alan will agree with me. Surely will. They don't want
Yeah,
this
that-
all stock holding cost.
Yeah, I think the sales price will definitely see some reduction, but it all depends also on the location and the product layout. It's very subjective.
Yeah.
That's subjective.
But there's bound to
Okay.
be some reduction. Okay, any other questions?
Yes.
Okay, let's entertain three
Yeah,
questions, one for each of us.
Okay, do you think most developer will use this COVID excuse to delay their projects?
Is that an option? I don't think it's an option because
Yeah.
they don't have the cash flow as well. Unless they have buyers, they do not have cash flow, the project definitely will be delayed. It's a survival mode now. We are no longer in pre-MCO. We are in a survival mode. Everyone is looking to survive. You need cash flow. Cash flow is the bloodstream of a human being. Without cash flow, nothing moves. And even then, the public has no money. The buyers, they have no money. The banks are not going to lend any more money unless they are certain that these buyers are good buyers. So if they're good buyers, why do they need to borrow? They have their own reserve. Right, Alan?
Yeah, it's very interesting to see the changes in the illegal landscape, because at the end of the day, the buyer and seller has to be bounded by this SPA. So as I agree with Dato Lim just now about the all these things must be tabled properly, to make sure that everyone is clear about it. Otherwise, you go into litigation, and that's not what buying property is all about.
Yeah. Okay. Right.
Okay, so the question I posed to the comment.
I think there was one question for me which I couldn't
Yes.
hear, Casey,
Yeah,
but
that one.
Casey has typed it
we'll
out
type
for
for
me.
you.
And the question is this. May I, Dato Raymond?
Yeah, please.
Okay, the question is any COVID legislation going to conflict with various arbitration clauses signed for cross-border transactions signed before COVID-19? Okay, first of all, arbitration clause is a manner of dispute, a forum of dispute. We have courts, we have arbitration. Courts is public, arbitration is private. And the legislation is a variation by operation of law into contracts and legislative amendments to say meetings limitation. So I don't think there's a conflict. There's of course a very a different issue if the government what's called expropriates or takes away certain licenses. Then of course it gives rise to what we call treaty violation that gives rise to exit arbitration. But that's a separate issue altogether. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, before we end the session, do you have any? Can we take one more question then? I know time is running.
Okay. So I choose one, right? Okay. To lawyer Lim, can buyer who has paid deposit and yet to sign SPA cancel the purchase and ask for the deposit paid?
Lawyer Lim can't hear you.
Lawyer
Chee Wee can hear now.
Okay.
I sorry, I'm trying to read the question. Can Raymond, can you repeat the question to me?
No, it's Casey.
Okay.
No, I can't hear Casey. That's my problem.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe I choose another questions. Okay.
Maybe he's typing it.
So will the housing market crash after MCO?
Okay, that one is a $6 million question. But I can tell you straight away, property market will slow down, but it will not crash unlike the stock market. Full stop. It will not crash. Okay, on that note, Dr. Alan Poon, you want to give your last say before we move on?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, buying property is a long-term haul. No one should go and speculate. Buy when you need it, but know what you're going into in terms of all the legal clause, and know your investment horizon, so that you do not have to go on a panic selling mode later on. I think that's very, very important. And now is the time where everybody should stay safe and be ready for all the uncertainty by making sure that you have some substantial cash to make sure that you can survive in the next 6 months or so.
Good advice. Okay, Dato Chee Wee, what is your last few words?
Well, my last few words is there was a question by Richard who said, what if he's paid a deposit but hasn't signed the SPA? Can he cancel the purchase? The answer is no, unless there's a force majeure clause that covers this, but it's unlikely. And my last word, is I hope, Dato Raymond, you can succeed in your push for legislation. And then to all who are listening, please write a letter to your local MP and push for this.
Right, thank you. So, in conclusion, and I'll repeat this, that the property market will slow down as it is slowing down, but believe me, it will not crash, unlike the stock market. But for those investors, there are always these 3 pointers observation. You invest in property, but you must remember one golden rule: location, location, and location, nothing else, okay? On that note, we are going to conclude this, and before I end these sessions, thank you to all the viewers who attended. May I now appeal to all of you, viewers, if you can, that the charity organization, Kachara Soup Kitchens, needs funding to support their charity work, to help not only the poor and homeless, but the frontliners in providing them with PPE support. Do log in to their website and let's play our part. However small it may be, it sure will help. Let's all stay home, stay calm, stay healthy, and stay positive. But most importantly, stay connected to the many live talks going on in the digital e-platform. Now, we have a video here. The video is on the coronavirus economy. I find this video very informative. Now, to those who have watched it, do watch it again, because I've watched it a number of times in order to better understand the economic reality. On that note, Ian is going to play the little video for you to watch. Please enjoy it, and good night all. Thank you, Ian. Please put the video on.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for time.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Let's talk about the economy. Stock markets around the world have been pounded. Oil prices have fallen off a cliff. In just 1 week, 3.3 million Americans applied for unemployment, almost 5 times the record. A week later, another 6.6 million.
We had to make the impossible decision to lay off 98% of our workforce this morning.
As COVID-19 spreads, the global economy is shutting down, and it's unlike anything we've ever seen.
A recession at least as bad as during the global financial crisis, or worse.
But what makes this collapse different? What will it take to recover? And are we headed for a depression? Welcome to another episode of Start Here from Quarantine in my hotel room. When it comes to the economy, we've really never been here before. Not like this. Even though we have lived through some huge economic shocks. There was the Great Depression that started in 1929 and lasted a decade. Back in 2001, the 9/11 attacks also badly damaged the economy and, of course, the airline industry. The 2007 subprime mortgage crisis in the US led to a global financial crisis and triggered the Great Recession, the longest in US history. Some countries still haven't recovered. And now there's a pandemic.
The swiftness and severity of the shock to the global economy, that is absolutely unprecedented.
This financial crisis is both different and worse because, first and foremost, it's a health crisis. So economists know we can't just fix the economy. That's like trying to fix your house while it's still on fire.
If we don't try to control the spread of coronavirus, then the suffering will be much bigger.
Let's take another look at the graph from our last episode. It shows a steep spike in the number of cases if we don't contain COVID-19 and the pressure that puts on hospitals. So countries right now are trying to flatten that curve by locking down and enforcing social distancing. But that has consequences. The more aggressively we try to slow the spread and save lives, the deeper the recession. So the irony is that to save the economy, you have to shut it down first. That's why economists expect a serious recession, maybe even a depression, which goes on for longer and is more severe.
What matters more than avoiding an all-out depression is protecting people's health, particularly protecting the most vulnerable, and so doing whatever we can to address the health impacts of the crisis.
For a lot of people, this really is going to be painful. For some, it already is. I'm on the lookout to speak to people who are really worried about their livelihoods because of the lockdowns. Nearly every sector of the economy is getting hit right now. But service jobs are most at risk. They require face time with customers, and everyone's being told to stay home. Look at India, where 1.3 billion people are under lockdown. 80% of the workforce are self-employed or earn a daily wage. 120 million of them are migrant workers. Many have now lost their jobs in the cities.
3 दिन से बैठे हुए हैं यहाँ पे कोई सुविधा नहीं है खाने पीने की.
In South Africa, soldiers are on patrol to make sure 57 million people stay home. The unemployment rate there before COVID-19 was already 30%.
Almost half of South Africans who are poor. The reality is that, if they don't go and work, and it could mean the difference between a meal or not.
So how can you even get your head around that kind of global unemployment and economic stagnation? You might be familiar with the law of supply and demand. Well, the coronavirus has managed to take out both. First, there was a supply shock as factories, businesses, and borders closed. That triggered a demand shock, because industries don't need raw materials if they aren't producing. And the lockdowns mean people aren't buying things or can't afford to because they're not earning money. Look at China, which in today's globalized economy is the factory to the world. The coronavirus outbreak virtually shut it down.
Its production has dropped by 25% over the last 3 months. So that is a big shock to the world economy.
China is also a massive buyer on the international market. Things like raw materials, all kinds of cars, and agricultural products. So that's also had an effect.
The biggest concern is China. China was already heading for -1% projection on GDP this year. And once China is getting out of its own health crisis, Europe, their biggest market, isn't getting into theirs, which basically means that we are seeing a huge demand contraction in the international trade.
As the virus began to spread, those supply and demand shocks spread to other countries too. And then the markets started to panic. Stock indexes in New York, London, Tokyo all had devastating sessions several times over. In the US, the Dow lost almost 3,000 points in just one day, the most ever. So how do we fix all this? Again, economists say we need to deal with the pandemic first. But there are things that both central banks and governments are doing to ease some of the pain. The job of a central bank is to make sure there's a steady supply of money flowing through the global financial system. And in a time of crisis, they also make sure the credit markets don't freeze up. So central banks around the world have pumped trillions of dollars into the banking system to make sure banks and businesses can bounce back when this is all over. They've also cut interest rates to make loans even cheaper. The central bank in the United States, the Federal Reserve System, has done something else too. It's made sure other central banks around the world can borrow enough US dollars. It's the currency the world runs on.
US dollars are to businesses what toilet paper is to households. They don't want to run out of US dollars before this crisis has passed.
But central bank heroics alone aren't enough. Governments need to step up too. World leaders have pledged hundreds of billions of dollars to help people, businesses, and the health sector battle this crisis. The British government, for example, put forward $435 billion.
That's like 15% of the United Kingdom GDP to try to get us through this crisis, because it is a matter of life or death.
In the US, the federal government came up with a $2.2 trillion relief package. That's about 10% of its GDP, the largest in American history.
This will deliver urgently needed relief to our nation's families, workers, and businesses.
But not everyone is convinced those rescue packages are going to be enough.
Dr. Doom, Nouriel Roubini, the economist who called the 2008 financial crisis 2 years before it happened, he's definitely not convinced. In fact, he's warning that containment measures have not been sufficient enough and that the fiscal stimulus package is neither large enough nor has it been enacted swiftly enough to seriously mitigate the risks, not just of a recession, everybody agrees that's going to happen, but to mitigate the risks of possibly a depression.
But other countries just don't have that kind of cash, especially if they're struggling economically or dealing with conflict, famine, even other diseases. The UN forecasts that income losses in developing countries because of the coronavirus could exceed $220 billion.
The economies that will have the toughest time crawling out of it are really the poorest nations, because they were in the worst position going into the crisis, and they will have the hardest time shaking off the negative effects of it.
Economists are bracing for things to get worse in the short term, but they also see this as an opportunity to fix what was broken. They have a saying, never let a good crisis go to waste.
We do also have to think about sustainability, about the sustainability of our planet, about the health and integrity of our ecosystems. Do we have a resilient economy? Do we have a resilient health system? Food production systems? Can we be sure that when a crisis like this happens and hits the economy, we are able to go on feeding people and keeping people healthy to stop a descent into social instability, which can very often follow from a deep and protracted depression?
Those are big questions for world leaders to answer. But right now, many of us, economists included, are looking to them to make some tough decisions to fight this pandemic and relieve the pain. A lot of people are already hurting. We don't know when we'll be back on this. Let's talk about the economy. Stock markets around the world have been pounded. Oil prices have fallen off a cliff. In just 1 week, 3.3 million Americans